Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Are you looking for a high-end desktop platform but you aren't sure which motherboard to buy? Are you bewildered by all the features, price ranges, and configurations of boards on the market? You've come to the right place. I have 4 different motherboards here and we're going to compare all 4 of them, take them out of the box, put them on the desk with the overhead camera so I can compare and contrast them. We've got 2 boards from Skylake-X and 2 boards from AMD's Threadripper, ranging from under $200 to over $400, with a lot of differences in terms of features, capability, power delivery, etc. Now, everything I'm about to describe here is linked down in the video description below to Amazon and Newegg as appropriate, and I'll also link to all of the boards for Skylake-X and Threadripper so you can certainly browse through the list. It's very extensive. First of all, thank you very much to ASRock. ASRock was nice enough to send me these 4 boards. This is not a sponsored video. The opinions are my own, but they did send me these boards for review, so I certainly appreciate it. Now, I have done a number of videos comparing Skylake-X versus Threadripper, talking about the various CPUs, configurations, pros and cons, who should build them, who should buy them, and why. We are not going to discuss that in today's video. I'm going to assume that you are here and you've already decided high-end desktop is for you. Consumer desktop, no. High-end desktop, yes. And I'm also going to assume that you have more or less decided whether Skylake-X or Threadripper is right for you. So I'm not going to be comparing them on the merits of the CPUs, rather the platforms and what you get for your money. What I will do instead is talk about the different CPU choices as they relate to the motherboard choices, which ones I think are appropriate for which. There are some important considerations there, especially as you get towards the higher end of the spectrum, but this is not a Skylake-X versus Threadripper video. That's already been done, linked in the video description below if you'd like to see that one. Now, before we get into the specifics of these motherboards, I want to talk a little bit about motherboard advice in general. And this applies to whether you're looking at high-end desktop platforms, consumer platforms, or anything in between. You generally, but not always, get what you pay for. As the price scales down, something has to be dropped. Now, it may be features that you don't care about. The 2 high-end boards here, for example, both have Wi-Fi. The low-end boards do not. You may say, I don't care about Wi-Fi. I'm going to be connected to wired Ethernet, and so Wi-Fi means nothing to me. And that's fine. If it doesn't mean anything to you, that's not a consideration. Likewise, the number of PCI Express slots changes, the number of USB ports changes, the number of M.2 slots can change, and you might very well say, I don't need those extra slots, or those extra ports aren't important to me, or I'm not installing 4 graphics cards or 4 add-in cards. Again, fine. In that case, a less expensive board might very well meet your needs. What the less expensive board does give up, however, in almost all cases, and this is true on the consumer side as well as the high-end desktop side, is power delivery. And I'm going to jump straight ahead here, a little bit ahead, and use one example to make the point. The ASRock Gaming 6 board here is actually only rated for the 180 watt CPUs, a 1950X or a 2950X. The 2990WX, for example, is a 250 watt CPU and it's not meant to be installed on it. It would run, but the setup and design isn't meant for it. And so actually in their materials, it says support for up to 180 watt CPU. The professional gaming will handle the 2990WX just fine. And frankly, if you're spending $1,700 on a CPU, my motherboard advice in general would be buy the best, whatever the company makes that you're buying from. You may choose not to buy from ASRock. These same motherboard spectrums exist from ASUS, MSI, and Gigabyte. Each of those companies makes a $200 board, a $300 board, and a $400 board. The differences in features and power delivery are not going to be substantially different with those companies as ASRock. This is simply examples to give you an idea of the product spectrum. As I said, that also applies to consumer level boards. A $99 X470 Ryzen board is not the same as a $199 X470 Ryzen board. Yes, they both have X470. We're not even talking about B350. Yes, they both have X470. Yes, they technically support the same features, but they can be miles and miles apart in terms of power delivery, options, expansions, support for future CPUs, etc. In fact, some of the very nice premium B450 boards are actually better than the super cheap X470 boards. You get what you pay for. If you're buying a Ryzen 7 2700X, spend $150 on your motherboard. Anything less and you're starting to cheapen the experience. But if you're buying a $150 Ryzen 5 1600, $150 board is overkill. You'd be better off putting your money into more CPU, in which case a $75 motherboard makes a whole lot more sense. Future upgradability is always a concern, but I'm kind of the opinion that buy the platform that you need and keep it throughout its life. I'm not personally a big proponent of CPU upgrades, even though I know they're supported, and especially AMD has gotten a lot of compliments on the fact that their CPUs are upgradable. How many people actually upgrade? I don't know. Certainly more will with AMD with their better support. Intel changes sockets every 5 minutes, maybe every 10 minutes. So I imagine there's more upgrades on the AMD side, but still, I suspect most people are better off buying the platform they need, buy the best CPU you can, buy the nicest motherboard appropriate for it, keep it for its life, and when it's time to replace it, you might be due for a new motherboard system, maybe even RAM. DDR5 RAM is coming in about 18 months or so, maybe 2 years, somewhere in there. So by the time new stuff comes out, you might be ready for a whole new platform anyway. But coming back to general motherboard advice, the nicer the motherboard you buy, the longer it's going to last you in terms of features and support, the more things you'll be able to plug into it, the nicer CPU it will support. And so while it's true that if you're buying a 1950X, this board, this Gaming 6 might be all that you need, if you in the future want to upgrade to, for example, Threadripper 3 coming, maybe 9-10 months from now, probably most likely, then you might actually want to spend the extra money on this board because after all, you're going to want the better power delivery if you're going to a 32 core or, gasp, 64 core chip. Don't know if those are coming, but who knows? I wouldn't put it past AMD. And the same thing is true on the Intel side. If you're going with the lower end of their CPU spectrum, it doesn't really matter, buy a cheaper board. Are you buying the 18 core, 36 thread, $1,800 beast? There's no conversation to be had. You buy the nice board. You're not going to buy the $179 X299 board and put a $1,700 CPU in it. I hope you wouldn't. And if you came here asking that question, let me save you the trouble of watching this and say, yeah, don't do that. The more you spend on your CPU, the more you can justify spending on your motherboard to get everything out of that CPU it can deliver. First things first, let's put the Threadripper boards aside and take a look at these two X299 Skylake-X boards. We will get to the Threadripper boards in a minute, but first we're going to take a look at these two boards. On my left, we have the Extreme 4. This board is currently available for about $170 on Newegg. For an X299 board with quad channel support and up to 44 PCI Express lanes and all the other features that comes with it, that's a pretty reasonable price. And it certainly is a solid board with good features for that price. If you are planning on buying, in my opinion, up to the 10-core i9 7900X or its refresh, then I think actually this board might very well make sense. You can spend more, and there's no crime in buying the nicer board for that, but it's kind of on the fence there. If you're spending about $800 to $900 on your CPU, you're getting the 10-core chip, and you're going with Skylake-X because you need the features of this platform. You need an Intel chip for whatever your applications are. You need AVX512 because your particular program or data set is using AVX512. For whatever reason, if this is your side, but you're not going with any of the top-end chips, the 14, 16, or 18-core chips, then you might consider going with the Extreme 4. It is not a bad board despite being a budget board. It's got superior power delivery and superior features to an awful lot of mid-range $150 to $170 consumer-level boards. So it is not by any definition cheap. Until you put it next to this thing, which is a $400 board that has every feature that you can possibly want, and it would kind of be overkill for one of the $800 CPUs. You can do it, but in my mind, this board is more suited for, say, the 14 or 16 or 18 core chips because it's got better power delivery, it's got more expansion options, more slots. And if you're building an extreme high-level system, and certainly if you're spending $1,500+ on your CPU, 200 versus 400 is frankly a trivial amount to spend on your system, and you're just getting a better platform with which to build from. Or you could go with this if you're starting with a cheaper CPU and you're planning on upgrading when they're cheaper. That's always a strategy as well, but you may or may not do that in the future. Now there are boards between these two. These represent the two extreme spectrums. There's also a pro gaming board, a little bit different than this, very similar features, just slightly different branding. And then there's also the Tai Chi board in the middle, and there's also a micro ATX version of this, which I don't have here. This is designed to show you the two bookends, the low end and the high end, and everything in the middle will be in the middle. Now in just a minute, I'm going to take these out of the box, put them side by side so the overhead camera can see them. But if you go to ASRock's website and you select these two boards and you click compare on them, you will get a long detailed web page with every feature of these boards side by side. You will then have to do what I did and spend 2 hours between these four boards and go, well, maybe an hour because you're not going to do both of them because you're going to pick a side. But you're going to have to go through that and line by line and go, okay, what are the differences? Because there's no difference engine on their site. In fact, none of the manufacturers that I could see, ASRock, ASUS, MSI, or Gigabyte, actually have a difference engine on their site that says, just show me what's different between these boards. I don't care about the fact that they all have USB 3.1 Gen 2. Well, but of course they do. I don't care about the fact that they all have ALC Realtek audio, 1220 audio chips. They all do. Well, at least all the ones I looked at anyway. So those are the kind of things that just clutter up the list. What I've done is tried to simplify it for you. Now I'm going to put these differences here on the screen in post, and I've done something I don't usually do. I've made myself some notes. I don't usually actually use notes because frankly I commit most of this to memory because I do it all day, every day, and I figure at some point I just need to commit it to memory and know it. But there's enough facts and figures, there's enough individual items here that I don't want to sit here and make a mistake in filming. So I made myself some notes. So in short, the Extreme 4 has a 60 amp power delivery, which is actually sufficient for almost anything. In fact, frankly, that would be sufficient for even the 18-core chip at stock speeds. The higher end board has a 65 amp power delivery system with a Dr. Moss chip on it versus the dual stack MOSFET over here. I am not BuildZoid. I am sure that he could give you a technical analysis of the difference between those two chips. My understanding is that Dr. Moss chips are better. So when it comes to power delivery, the gaming i9XE is better for what it's worth. We have 11-phase power delivery on the Extreme 4. We have 13-phase power delivery on the i9. Again, both are fine at stock speeds. I would fully expect to be able to drop a i9 7990 XE chip in here, if you remember the product numbers, and it should run fine with all 18 cores, but probably doesn't have any overclocking room, or certainly not very much. But again, if you've got that kind of money, why are we even having this conversation? Go buy the nice board and be done with it. DDR4 support is different. The official overclocked DDR4 support of the Extreme 4 is DDR4 4200. The i9 has support for DDR4 4400. That is a very minor difference, and I find it unlikely that anybody using either of these boards is going to care because you're not putting that faster RAM in here. Why? If you need these boards, you need large amounts of RAM. You could get 16 gigabytes of RAM to run at DDR4 4400. What you aren't going to do is to get 64 or 128 gigs of RAM to run at 4400. The more RAM you add, if you populate all 8 DIMM slots, you're running in quad channel mode, it's going to be expensive to even run at 3600, much less 4000, much less 4400. Maybe at some point in the future that's going to change, but probably not because DDR5 is around the corner. So there is a DDR4 memory speed difference here, but I don't think that actually matters for most people. There is a slot difference. There are 4 X16 slots on the high-end board and 3 X16 slots on the Extreme 4. The number of people who are going to care about that difference is this big. Frankly, most of you probably won't. But if by chance you do, and I'm not even suggesting that you're going to drop 4 graphics cards in. They might be compute cards, but they're not probably going to be graphics cards these days. But if you do want to add in expansion cards, either cards that support multiple NVMe SSDs, extra networking ports, or some other peripheral that needs extra slots, you do have an extra slot on the i9. Built-in LAN support is another big difference. This board has what you would expect for a board under $200. It has a single wired gigabit Ethernet. This board has what I would expect at $400. It has 10 gigabit Ethernet. In fact, it's got 3 RJ45 Ethernet ports. It has one 10 gig port and it has 2 1 gigabit Intel ports, and they do support teaming. So if by chance you need 3 separate network connections, or perhaps one 10 gig connection and 2 1 gig connections that you can team, far superior support. I mentioned Wi-Fi earlier also. Yes, this board has AC Wi-Fi built in, dual channel, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. It's the good stuff. It's got antennas and everything. This does not. That being said, how many people are going to buy this level of platform and use Wi-Fi? Hopefully not many of you, but if you do, it has it. Now this next feature is something that you may use exactly once, BIOS flashback. This board supports BIOS flashback, and it's a feature I would absolutely expect to see on a $400 anything board. What this means is that with no CPU installed, you can put the BIOS on a flash drive, stick it in here, press the button, and it will auto-flash the latest BIOS. If you're using one of the refresh chips and you have an early board such as this that was manufactured at the beginning of the X299 line, you may need to flash the BIOS before you can put an updated chip in it. The Extreme 4 does not support BIOS flashback. You must have a working CPU installed in order to update the BIOS. If you have some future chip that is not supported out of the box, you're kind of in a bit of a pickle then. So that's something to think about in terms of support for that. Dual BIOS. If you have a problem with a corrupted BIOS for any reason, the high-end board has 2 BIOSes. The Extreme 4 has 1. Not a feature that most of you are really going to need all that much, but you're getting something for your money. It's not just more expensive because, oh look, shiny box. Speaking of extreme features, this has a debug LED. It has the little digit readout that you can see what's wrong. If your system isn't booting or posting or it's frozen or something has happened, then you can actually look in the manual and look up and see what the problem is. The Extreme 4 does not. It also has power and reset switches right on the board, which the Extreme 4 does not. Whether you care is a separate conversation, but it has them. And that brings me to storage. Now, the standard complement of SATA ports on an X299 board is 8, and the Extreme 4 has the 8 ports provided by the chipset. It also has 2 M.2 slots for NVMe drives built right into it. That's wonderful. The i9 $400 board has 3 M.2 slots and 10 SATA ports. The extra 2 SATA ports are provided by an extra AS media chip, so they're not built into the LAN, they're not built into the Intel chipset, but if you need to plug in a couple of extra devices, then they're certainly there. Of course, if you're going to plug in large numbers of NVMe drives, you might be dropping in one of the HyperCards that supports 4 of them on a single card and then split the slots. But if you want to be able to install 3 NVMe drives, you can do it here. And with that comparison out of the way, we're going to start off with the least expensive board on the desk, and then we're going to work our way through it. Then we're going to have the comparison conversation of Threadrippers. I'm sure some of you will appreciate timestamps. They'll probably end up down in the video description below. But having said that, now let's take a look at this. RGB LED. Well, it must be fast since it says RGB right on it. And it says Extreme, so there you go. Opening the box up inside, we have stuff and a collection of things. I don't know what that is yet, but we'll find out what that is. What do we have in here? A piece of paper. And I'll have to turn it this way so I can see what it says. This is showing what the PCI Express slot configuration is for the Skylake-X CPUs. If you are watching this and by chance trying to install a Skylake-X CPU, stop right now and don't do that. Why those ever existed is beyond me. Intel, I love you, but really? Which engineer, which marketing person, it couldn't have been an engineer, which marketing person greenlit those things? Now, if you're watching this and you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. You're better off not knowing. We have is this a high bandwidth bridge? It is a high bandwidth bridge. Now, these will work, yeah, there we go. This will work on the 10 series cards, if you're going to SLI them, which you probably aren't. And so now we have, software setup guide. Okay. And then we have the manual. Oh, goody, we have a coaster for our coffee. I know, it's a driver CD, and if you're not online, you can certainly use this. It's got a sticker inside that says ASRock powered. Truthfully, everything on here can be downloaded off of ASRock's website. And if you have a system like this, you have an internet connection. We have a postcard that says stamp here. Well, fair enough. Now, don't lose these. These are very important. These are the M.2 screws, 1, 2, and 3. And you might be sitting here going, wait a minute. You said that there were 2 M.2 slots. Why are there 3 screws? You can add a Wi-Fi adapter to this. There is not an M slot for it. There is, I believe it's called an E slot. So you can add Wi-Fi to this. It doesn't come with it, but you can certainly buy an adapter and you'll need a screw for that. So there's that. Quick installation guide. Hang on a second. This is the quick install guide. Hang on. Let me just go grab myself about a case of coffees and I will sit down and read this. In fairness, hang on, let me get this here. There we go. That's Dutch, that's English. This is the English part. The rest of that is other languages, and you can see them right here. So it's actually not that long. What do we have here? That's where the RGB goes, RAM support, M.2. It's got all the stuff that you need. That's all very typical. We have ourselves, really, ASRock? Okay, I'm going to call ASRock out here. I said earlier this was not a sponsored video. It's not a sponsored video. They did send this to me, but I'm going to be blunt. This is cheap. For a board that retails for $200, this should be silk screened. Does it matter? No, unless you're going for a beauty build, then buy a nicer board. But the fact that this isn't even, it's just punched and it's bare metal. This just screams cheap, and it bugs me when I see that because what it tells me is that the whole product was made like that. ASRock, you can do better. It's like, what, 20 cents to make that silk screen and make it look really nice? I know every dollar counts, but come on, make your motherboards look nice. We have what looks like 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 SATA cables. Not expensive. Frankly, if you're building a system like this, I hope you have a whole drawer full of them. This isn't really, none of this should probably be somebody's first computer, so you should have some already, but you have them. If I had to guess, is this for, what is this for, Wi-Fi cables? Antenna? I still have no idea what that's for. Now we're going to open this up. Nope, it comes this way. And here's a motherboard. X299. I do like the Intel high-end desktop platform for a number of reasons. And I wish, oh, that looks nice. Here, we'll stick that up here. I'll turn this upright so the overhead camera gets a nice zoomed in view of it. It's a nice looking board. I like it. I like the fact that it's not a bunch of colors that will clash with a system build. It's muted. I don't like a lot of colors on my boards. I prefer just grays and blacks or whites if you want them. You got some gray, you got a couple of stripes. You've got a little bit of gray on the heat sinks right here, but otherwise it's just basically a very muted affair. You've got your 8 RAM slots, you've got your CPU socket. I mentioned I like the high-end platform. I love it because the socket, the mounting tray for coolers is built right in. There's no back plates, there's no screw through or drill through. You need no access to the back of the board. On the consumer boards, and this is true of both AMD and Intel, shame on you AMD and shame on you Intel. I'm sorry, but I'm going to call both of you out. The consumer platforms need a fixed socket with fixed screws like this. This is so much easier. I'm sure it's expensive, which is why you don't do it. You can afford to put it here. But the higher quality socket, and TR4 has it as well with a built-in mount, is so much easier to mount coolers to. desktops need to go to this. In any case, so we've got our two M.2 slots right here, and there is our Wi-Fi. Here's our M2. I mentioned we had the other one right here. You can see M.2 Wi-Fi. There's the screw for it, so you can add a little bit of adapter. And I don't know where the antenna slots are at the moment, but I'm sure we can find them once I have it. This is the first I've looked at the board. I'm unboxing it with you, and you can see we've got a heat pipe running between the two heat sinks right here. And we're back. I had to go grab my handy clippers here because I want to take the board off of the foam that it comes with. I do like how ASRock packs these. And I'll be blunt, every motherboard company should do this. Full stop. The fact that they put the motherboard in a foam tray, clipped down to make it absolutely secure, every single motherboard should come like this. Besides the fact that it makes it easier, not impossible, but easier to determine that your board is in fact new and has not previously been opened. I mean, you could replace these, you could clip these on, so I mean, there's no guarantee. But the fact that that safely secures the board, I'm going to take it out of here, make it easier for the camera to pick up on it. Put that down there, there we go. So we've got two 8-pin CPU power connectors up here. Considering the budget nature of this board, that's probably overkill, but they'd probably get complained out if they didn't put them up there, so that's plenty of power delivery. We can see three fan headers right here to provide us with fan power module, excuse me. I had to look at that for a second. So we've got the standard RGB header and then the VROC module. We've got a 24-pin ATX power connector. We've got our battery. Those haven't changed in like forever, have they? We have our USB 3.0 front panel connector. Good place for it, a little bit lower. I like that right there. Then we've got our 8 SATA ports down here. Front panel connectors, another fan connector, and we've got some USB 2 connectors and TPM module, front panel audio, etc. We have our onboard audio, but we don't really have fancy onboard audio. What's interesting about this, it is a Realtek ALC 1220. It does have the Sound Blaster Cinema add-on software, and you can certainly get decent sound out of it. But if you're spending this kind of money and you care about audio, you'll do what I did. There's a video on my channel showing, discussing sound cards. And I ended up installing one of the 7.1 Sound Blaster sound cards into my existing Skylake-X system. And that's what I've been using for the past year to do voiceovers, etc. And I've got a very nice microphone plugged into it. The sound quality improved immeasurably. Onboard audio is good enough for most people, and if you're just casual with it, you're not too worried about it, it's fine. But once you step up to this platform, if you're serious about audio, the onboard audio is irrelevant. You're either adding in a dedicated sound card or you're using an external breakout box or a mixer or something different. And if you're not, then you should be, because my streaming machine, my i7 8700K, has one of the Sound Blaster XE sound cards in it. I've got another one for the next Threadripper build that we're doing, because once you've heard better sound than the integrated sound chips, you really don't want to go back. I already mentioned the M.2 Wi-Fi module down here. There are 3 X16 slots, but I suspect for most people, there's effectively 2. If you look at the spacing, you have these 2 slots right here with a large gap between them to install 2 cards here, perhaps an oversized card, either a graphics card, well, probably an oversized graphics card here. If you're building an extreme system, you should have an extreme graphics card. And then an extra slot here, which could be used for a second card or for NVMe or 10 gigabit networking or whatever else you want to put in it. There is another slot below it. However, electrically, that's not wired all the way across. And then we have a PCI Express 1X slot up here, which probably will never get used. Its real purpose is to separate the graphics card slot from the RAM slots and give yourself some room there, probably more than anything else. All things considered, fit and finish, it's nice. These heat sinks are fairly solid. I'm going to lift this up so the camera can see them. These heat sinks don't really have a lot of fins on them. They're large, solid blocks of metal. In fact, if I turn it this way, you can see right into the heat sink and the big gap right there. For this to be an effective radiator to really do its job well, it should be composed of more fins and more surface area and less solid block of metal. So it looks nice. I'm not entirely convinced it's as effective as it could be. You can see all the power delivery down there. I'm now going to turn the board around this way so it's straight up for the camera. We have our audio ports here. You can see we have the optical out, and then of course we've got our HD audio ports. There is our single RJ45 10 gigabit, that's the other board, 1 gigabit Ethernet connection here, 2 USB 2 ports. Don't knock them, those are useful to have. Keyboard, mouse, adapter for a wireless mouse, webcam. There's plenty of USB 2 devices, a printer that simply don't require anything else. So the fact that they're there don't bother me at all. There's a very limited selection of USB ports here, however. There are 4 USB 3.0 ports and then 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2 ports. One's Type C, one's Type A. This is a very limited selection. Now, to be sure, you can get for a relatively modest amount of money an external 7 or 10 port USB hub. Put it on your desk, you have all the USB ports you need, but ideally I'd like to see more back here. We do have what I am at this point going to assume is a BIOS reset switch, because this doesn't support flashback, so that has to be a reset switch. And then we have a separate PS2 keyboard and PS2 mouse port. You don't see that very often anymore, but on high-end platforms like this, there are people who are going with this, who are building a backwards compatible machine to run legacy software. They went with Intel instead of Threadripper, even though it's more money, because they need that guaranteed works with everything all the time, 100% of the time, Intel code, execution, everything else. Many of those people have PS2 devices, either a keyboard or mouse that needs to be plugged in, and so they're included. I suspect most of you aren't going to be using that, but you could. As far as the rest of the board goes, it looks very nice. I'll turn it over just so you can see the back of the board. It's a motherboard. There's nothing really special back here, but you can at least see what it looks like. Now, as far as the other board, let me get this out of the way, and we'll go open up the expensive one. And with all that out of the way, now we're going to take a look at the cream of the crop. The Fatality ASRock Professional Gaming i9 XE. Who comes up with these names? That is a name and a half. And that is a box and a half. That's a nice looking box. No, it doesn't matter, but it's a nice looking box. So the first thing we need to do is unbox it, and this opens up completely different than the other one. The other one is just a simple motherboard box. This is fancy. So we'll slide this out sideways so you can see it. Oh, there we go. There's the beautiful ASRock logo. And with that out of the box, this opens completely differently. In fact, this is going to open away from me, which will make it easier to get inside the box. This is what I meant about quality. The other I/O shield was not silkscreen. This is. Does it matter? Well, that's personal preference, but that's much nicer looking. You've got gigabit Ethernet, then you've got the 10, you've got all the stuff labeled. That's much, much nicer. Again, we have another sheet that talks about PCI Express slot configuration and which memory modules work if you have one of the Skylake-X chips. Don't buy Skylake-X chip, period. ASRock Wi-Fi connector utility. This board has Wi-Fi. And then we have a whole slew of stuff. Here's our first antenna for the Wi-Fi adapter. Here is our first M.2 slot. What else do we have here? Here's another antenna. Set those aside. Another M.2 screw, I said slot earlier. This, I'm not going to open this. This is the high bandwidth bridge for a 10 series NVIDIA graphics card. We have 2 double packs. These are 4 SATA cables, which is fine. There is one more M.2 screw right here. That's 3 so far. We have, oh, okay, this is interesting. I'm gonna open this. I don't actually own one of these. This is a 3-way SLI connector. Interesting. It's a high bandwidth 3-way. You know what? I'm going to take that out of the, I'm going to go ahead and open this. Let's take a look at the differences here. That's interesting. So there's the spacing between those 2 slots, and then a little bit less spacing right here. So this is a 2-card, 3-card. I didn't actually realize it came with it. That's interesting. Well, if you need one of those and you plan on putting 3 cards together, knock yourself out. Of course, that's the 10 series. The 20 series is out, which uses NVLink, so software setup guide, pretty straightforward, similar to the other one, just printed differently. And then we have the quick setup guide with a postcard. I do have to say, ASRock is pretty consistent about these postcards. That's pretty nice. And then we have another drink coaster for our, yes, I know it's a driver D. So we have ASRock powered right there, a sticker. And then again, same thing. This is English only to this point. So that's the English part of the manual, and then the rest of it is in 25 languages or whatever it is. And then it contains, yeah, all the same layout stuff you would expect. Now it's time to take a look at the motherboard. Oh, that just comes straight out, easy enough. I love premium products. This is a premium motherboard. You're paying for it, but if you're buying a high-end chip, this is the one to get. And with all that done, let's take this out of the plastic very carefully. That is nice looking. I'll set that right over there, and we will turn this towards the camera. There's plastic to peel. Oh, goody. Just what everybody loves. I'm going to do the same thing here again, and I'm going to cut these clips away so that we can get this out and take a look at it. With the foam removed, we can take a closer look at the board. Several things just jumped out at me right away as soon as I looked at it, besides the fact that we had to take the plastic off. We do have the debug LED down here, which is nice if you're trying to diagnose either why your system isn't booting or why it's freezing on you or why it's resetting. There is a power switch and reset switch down here, which is nice. 10 SATA ports right here, 8 from the chipset and then 2 more from an extra chip that ASRock added. There are 2 USB 3.0 front panel headers here. This is a big, big deal. And now that I think about it, that's an oversight on the other board, because if you have a case that has 4 USB 3 ports in the front, you need both of these in order to connect it. So that's kind of a swing and a miss. If you have one of the new cases that has 4 USB 3 ports on the front and a USB 3.1 Type-C port on the front, I recently did an unboxing and overview of a case that has that. You will need this as well, which is the USB 3.1 header. So actually, you'll need all 3 of these to make all of those ports work. 2 USB 2 ports on the bottom, and you've got your VROC connector, your RGB header, front panel audio, TPM connector, front panel headers. You've got several fan connectors over here as well. You got one there, you got your battery here. 3 M.2 slots right in the middle. I'm kind of starting at the bottom, working my way up. 3 M.2 slots versus the 2 on the cheaper board, which is totally understandable and fine. I like the fact that the top one is not under the graphics card. That's nice, because if you're just going with a single NVMe on the board, then you can put in a graphics card here and then it won't sit under the graphics card. You can also, if you're not installing multiple cards, you can install another one down here, but if you put one in the middle, then yeah, your graphics card's going to be on top of it. The audio solution, frankly, doesn't look to be a lot different just from first glance in comparison to the other one. It actually may very well be the identical solution. Again, same thing I said before, premium system, sound card or breakout box if you care about audio. There's a small heatsink here, which actually I'm not 100% sure what's under there. I'd have to remove it. It might be the Wi-Fi adapter. It might be, that actually might be the Wi-Fi adapter. There is the 8 RAM slots right here. You can see the CPU socket itself. There's another fan header right here in the middle of the board. In fact, there's 2 of them. 1, 2, So this fan header right here would be, for example, for an external exhaust fan that's right here. I can think of one really good thing for this fan header. If you have a big, large tower cooler that has 2 fans on it, one fan might run to one of these back ports and the other fan can run right here, so you don't have to stretch it around the cooler. Some coolers are going to be designed a bit differently, so that provides you with options there. There is a CPU fan connector up here, and there are not a bunch of fan headers up top, which is interesting. I'm sitting here looking for additional fan headers up top, but there are none. There is one CPU fan header. You've got the CPU optional fan or water pump header here. This is a chassis fan connector for the exhaust fan, and then you've got a couple of fan. I am surprised at how few fan headers are on this board, actually. I have seen boards for $150 that have more fan headers than this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did I miss one? Are there 5 fan headers on this board? This is the kind of thing that you can sit and look at pictures on the internet all you want, and it's so easy to miss this stuff. I just had another look. If I'm missing one, you let me know in the comments below, but 5 fan headers is completely ridiculous for a board at this price point. ASRock, what are you thinking? I love you guys. That's unacceptable. There should be at least 7, if not 8 fan headers on a board of this price point. There is a second RGB header up here, which is interesting. So there's 2, one on the top, one on the bottom, which I don't know how many people building this care about RGB. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it does have them. Do me a favor, ASRock, replace those RGB headers with fan headers. I would rather have those on this, but that's neither here nor there. PCI Express slots, 1, 2, 3, 4 X16 slots, all with the metal shroud. The cheaper board only had 2 with the metal shroud, and the bottom one was kind of useless. These are spaced better as well. And then we have one 1X slot, which I suspect no one will ever use, but it's there, I suppose. 2 8-pin CPU power connectors up top. And that's about it for all of that, except something that you also don't really notice until you have the boards in front of you. Cooling fins. I'm going to tilt the board up this way and let the camera look at it. This actually has fins. I'll grab the other board in a minute. These aren't micro fins like you'd expect from like a radiator. They're better than the cheap board. There are fins on this side, fins on this side. There are fins here where the heat pipe runs through. The metal cooler for the VRMs does appear to be better quality, and it does appear to have more fins. Whether or not they get airflow in there, whether or not that makes a difference, I can't say. But just on the appearance, just looking at them side by side, it looks better, but we'll have to see what it's like once I actually get this installed. I will be using this board in an updated build if I can get a refresh chip from Intel. Let me turn these around. I do have the existing Skylake-X chips, but I don't have the new Cascade Lake refresh. So we have the Wi-Fi connectors right here. We've got our audio solution, 3 RJ45, and the one in the middle should be the 10 gigabit port with the 2 Intels on either side. Actually, now that I look at it, there's no more USB ports on it. What is with the lack of USB ports, ASRock? Seriously. 2 2.0 ports, a combo PS2 mouse keyboard port, 4 USB 3.0s, and then the same USB 3.1 Type A and Type C port. Now, we do have the reset switch, but we also have the BIOS flashback switch. So if you need a board that you can update the BIOS on without a CPU installed, you've got that covered. Or if you can't boot into the BIOS for any reason, we will turn the board around. There you go. There's definitely more on it, or at least I think there is compared to the other board. Let's put these side by side. And of course, I always have to chuckle and laugh whenever I see this. Foxconn. It's like, which motherboard would you like? Would you like an ASRock board? Would you like an Asus board? Would you like an MSI board? Would you like a Gigabyte board? All made by Foxconn in China. Yes, I know technically Foxconn is a Taiwanese company, but no, let's be honest, it's all made in China. Although this actually says made in Vietnam, which would surprise me, because as far as I know, these are all made in China, but it says made in Vietnam on the box. I could be wrong. Maybe they're spreading their manufacturing and not making everything in China anymore. And with that detailed look aside, I've now placed both of the boards next to each other on the table. As you can see here, there are some differences, but they're pretty much still the same motherboard. You've still got the same socket, the same RAM sockets, you've got the heat sinks and fins up here, you get a couple of expansion slots, you've got the chipset, the various ports around the board. The differences come in the details. Number of expansion slots, number of M.2 slots, whether it has AC, Wi-Fi, or whether it doesn't and just has a space to add it. whether or not it has a single network port or 3 of them. Actually, the USB ports are the same between them, and the Extreme 4 actually has 2 separate PS2 ports, whereas there's only a combo port on the Extreme. You've got a much better front panel arrangement, which I missed when I was going over them. When I made up my notes, I spent at least an hour going line by line, detailed, typing up a Word document with notes, and I missed the USB front panel connector difference. It's a perfect example of something that's easy to miss, even when you're looking for differences, when you're being very, very specific. So if you, for example, don't buy one of these boards and you buy either the Tai Chi board in the middle, or perhaps you buy an Asus or MSI or Gigabyte board, do look for those details. Ask yourself, what's the most important thing that I need on my board? Because if you have one of those new fancy cases with 5 USB ports on the front of it, you're going to need all these ports, and then your decision probably gets narrow pretty quickly. Interestingly enough, I criticized the expensive board for only having 5 fan headers. The Extreme 4 also only has 5 fan headers, but it has 2 RGB ports just like the expensive one. So I guess we all know what's really important these days is RGB. Otherwise, it's kind of what you see is what you get. They're both nice boards. I think the more expensive your CPU, the more expensive your motherboard should be. And if you're buying anything over the i9-7900X or its Cascade Lake equivalent, then you should be getting a much nicer board. If by chance you find yourself a deal on an i7, probably 7820X, I don't think I'd consider an i7 7800 at this point, which is a 6-core, 12-thread chip. I suppose if you need PCI Express lanes, but that thing only has 28 instead of 44, you could certainly go with the Extreme 4. Sitting here looking at them, I am inclined to think that the better solution for most people is to spend a bit more. That doesn't mean you have to spend 400. Maybe you spend 300 and meet somewhere in the middle. The Extreme 4 seems, I don't know, stripped down pretty far for the CPU that you should consider putting in it. That's my opinion. Let me get these off the table and let's go take a look at some Threadripper boards. Here we have the Threadripper boards on the desk. You'll notice I've added the retail boxes to the CPUs. I don't have the Skylake-X retail boxes. I would plaster them all over the desk as well. Before we get into comparing these boards, let me make your life really, really simple. If you are buying one of the W chips, the 2990WX, for example, run, don't walk, and buy the top-end board from whichever company you are looking at buying from. If you are buying from ASRock, then it's going to be this. Yes, it's expensive. It retails for $400. Well, actually, I think it retailed a bit more than that. It's a little less than $400 on the day that I'm filming this video, and there's a mail-in rebate, I think, for $20 at the moment, but those vary. That's what the links in the video description are there for. Check current prices, because while the Gaming 6 is definitely less expensive, on the day I filmed this video, these really weren't $200 apart once you took into account the sales and the mail-in rebates. If they're $150 apart, it becomes more interesting. Less than that, and then I'm definitely slanted towards the Fatality Professional Gaming X399 board. However, that being said, if you are looking at a chip of over 16 cores, run, don't walk, buy the best board. Now, if it's not from ASRock, if it's from MSI, Gigabyte, or Asus, again, find whatever is at the top of their ladder and buy that board. Even if you go, why do I really need all those features? What you need is the power delivery. And that's, I said this at the beginning of the video, that's where it kind of makes most of the feature differences irrelevant. The Phantom Gaming 6 board is marketed by ASRock, it's right on their website, for up to 180 watt CPUs. That's the 16-core chips, either the 1950X or the 2950X. That is a 250 watt CPU, and these are at stock base speeds. TDP is not the same as power consumption, but that's what the board's rated for. If you plan to take one of those things and overclock it, 300, 400 watts of power is not crazy. What would be crazy is trying to put a $1,700 CPU on a $200-ish motherboard. I'm not knocking ASRock here. The same advice would apply to the entry-level boards from any of the other companies. I'll pick on MSI here for a second. MSI sells a variety of X399 boards. They sell some very nice premium $400 to $500 boards. And if you're buying that CPU, go buy one of those boards. There's no debate or conversation. You need the premium board option. They also sell their SLI Plus for $200, $250. If you install that CPU on an SLI Plus, you're crazy. You really, that's just foolhardy. And the sad thing is, somewhere, someone will do that. So that's the first thing to say. If you're buying the premium CPU, the discussion is over. You don't need to watch the rest of this except to see the unboxing of this. But if you're buying a 16-core chip, 180-watt chip, either the 1950X or the 2950X, then it becomes more interesting. You might very well, from a dollar to feature, performance, etc. ratio, be better off with something like this, because you can then put that extra money into a better cooler, a better graphics card, etc. Especially the 1950X, which is currently available for just over $500. Now, certainly, if you're spending $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 on a CPU, $150 difference between the boards becomes quite trivial, unless you're building 1,000 of them. But if you're building one, that's not a huge deal. But the 1950X is so interesting and competitive, and I talked about that in my Threadripper versus Skylake-X 2019 overview video, which will be out before this is. This is compelling for people who are primarily interested in workstation performance, content creation performance, and not gaming performance, but they're not prepared, not interested, or not able to effectively utilize all the cores of that. I have one of these. I've been using it. I've been running Adobe on it, rendering on it. Yes, a 2950X is faster, but boy, that is a great value for the money. It's almost $300 less expensive. Actually, I've seen it more than $300 less expensive, closer to $350 less. $350 going from $900 to $500 and change is a lot of money. Well, it is to me anyway. That's a decent amount of money. So if you're buying this chip for $500, I would not spend $400 on a board. I think it's out of place. Some of you might say, but what if I want to buy this to tide me over before going to Threadripper 3, which whenever that comes out? Okay, fair enough. That's the one place where I could understand that argument. Perhaps you're a new content creator, perhaps you're live streaming, perhaps you're making YouTube videos, perhaps you're getting into 3D animation, maybe you're in school, maybe you're fresh out of school. And as nice as Ryzen 7 is, it's just not quite enough, and you want this beast of a CPU. And a beast it is. It is double Ryzen 7. It's basically two Ryzen 7 1800Xs. It's tremendous performance. You get quad channel RAM, PCI Express lanes. You know the scoop. If you're watching this video at this point, you know the story. For $500-ish and $200-ish for the motherboard, look, I've been an Intel fan for a long time, but I'm sorry, this just kicks Intel across the room and makes it beg for mercy when it comes to value for the money. It's almost embarrassing how far apart the price to performance is on a high-end desktop platform. It's there on the consumer side too, but it's so out of whack on the high-end platform, it's almost like Intel just gave up. Because Intel's 16-core chip, granted, is faster than this, but not hugely so. I mean, it's not like double the performance, but it's like 3 times the price. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. In any case, this, for a new content creator, is a really interesting package if you want to make 4K YouTube videos, if you want to do 3D animation, if you're doing that kind of stuff, but you don't have a lot of money because you're new at it. I could not recommend this more. But if you are doing the kind of workload that will ultimately benefit from 32 or possibly 64 cores when the 64-core chips come, which I'm expecting will come with Threadripper 3, and if you go, look, I can't afford that right now, I can't use it, I need to get started, but I'm interested in being able to upgrade in the future to 32 or 64 cores, but I don't want to change my platform. You know what? In that case, I can understand putting this board with this chip, because it gives you that option. It also gives you other features. It gives you 10 gigabit networking, gives you more slots, it gives you more stuff. And so if you look at the price and go, you know what, I can swing the $150 difference between the boards. I want the future proofing and the extra features and the premium power delivery and the better overclocking. I want the better board. Go for it. If you're on a tight budget, but you really need the 16 cores because you're a new content creator and you just go, look, I got to get into the platform cheap, I think this ASRock Phantom Gaming 6 is an excellent, excellent choice. When Threadripper launched, there were no Threadripper boards in this price point. Maybe the MSI SLI Plus, but don't buy that board. I've looked at it. It gives up too much to get to that price point. So this is definitely an interesting option. I understand that I haven't taken these out of the box yet, but I'm giving you market position advice based upon the research I've done, based upon what I know about these chips, based upon my use of this chip. For those of you curious, there is a build, well, it's not a build, it's an overview video on my channel. I did a video on the Threadripper. I have a 1950X installed in an Asus ROG Strix-E board. It's a $330 board. I didn't pay that, of course, because I'm the deal man. I got a much better deal. I got a phenomenal deal on that on Black Friday, by the way. The board and the chip was so cheap, it was like, yeah, okay, sure, why not? For those of you wondering, by the way, you'll notice the CPU is in here. I actually already had one of these. I've shown that on my channel many, many times, but the deal, which was available for like 3 hours on Black Friday, was so good, I was like, I guess I'm going to have another one of those. AMD didn't send me that one, by the way. I did buy that, but it was so cheap. It's like, now we have 2 Threadrippers. What I'll probably end up doing, this is a complete aside, I did buy this as well. AMD didn't send this to me. I'm going to sell this chip. We're going to have 2 Threadripper machines here, but I don't need 2 1950Xs for my YouTube channel. There is a benefit from an experience and making video point of view and a build point of view and just broadening and increasing my overall experience. So yeah, I ponied up the money and spent $1,700 on that CPU because, I don't know, AMD's inconsistent on what they sent me. AMD did send me that Athlon 200 GE that we did a recent $300 build in. Gee, thanks AMD, I appreciate it. You send me a $60 chip, but you won't send me one of those. Nah, go figure. So I'm actually going to sell this because I don't need 2 1950Xs and go with that. But then again, my YouTube channel is 3 years old and we've been growing. We've recently passed 350,000 subs. And so I can justify this sort of thing because we're getting ready to hire a video editor who we will be paying to edit and make our videos nicer looking. So that actually makes total sense from that point of view. But if you started your YouTube channel 6 months ago, this makes much more sense. That is way overkill for new content creators, unless you just have lots of money lying around. This 1950X is spectacular deal. And for all of you who are not yet tired of hearing my voice, we're not quite going to take these out yet because I have my notes again. I briefly want to mention the differences. This Gaming 6 has an 8-phase power delivery, which to be honest surprised me. I would have expected a little bit better, but it has an 8-phase power delivery and it has up to 180 watt CPU support, DDR4 3400 versus DDR4 3600. I don't think either number matters. I have DDR4 3200, 64 gigs worth, in my 1950X machine. I think trying to make 64 gigs of DDR4 3600 work is going to be interesting and challenging. It might work on a second-gen chip. It's probably not going to work very well on a first-gen chip. That's up to you. I think more RAM for systems of this level is more important than fast RAM, and trying to get that level of RAM, especially if you're going with 32 cores, 64 gigs is the minimum. 128 is not crazy. If you're going with that kind of RAM, trying to make it fast gets expensive and almost impossible really, really quickly. The nicer board does have better power delivery. It's 11-phase power. It is digital power delivery with the Dr. Moss stuff. Again, BuildZoid could probably give a proper technical explanation of that, but from watching his videos and from the research I've done, basically, first of all, if you're running that kind of chip, there's no conversation. And even if you're running a cheaper chip, if you want to overclock, if you want to try to get the most out of it possible, there is, in fact, better power delivery and better overclocking capability on this board. Whether or not that's worth it to you is a separate point. There are more PCI Express X16 slots on here. We have 4 versus 3. Just like the Skylake-X boards, we have Wi-Fi on the more expensive board. We do not have Wi-Fi on the Gaming 6. I really hope, just like the other one, that nobody is trying to run Wi-Fi on these. You should be running wired Ethernet. Speaking of wired Ethernet, kudos to ASRock. The Gaming 6 comes with 2 Ethernet ports, a standard gigabit and a kind of a mid-range one, a 2.5 gig Ethernet port. So it's not 10, but it's not 1. That's a nice touch. We have 10 gigabit Ethernet networking along with 2 Intel 1 gigabit connectors here. So we have 3 RJ45s on the high-end board, and the 2 1 gigs can be teamed just like on the Skylake-X board. And then finally, just like on Skylake-X, BIOS flashback. The Gaming 6 does not support it, whereas the big fancy board does. And this is important because I have had this board on my shelf. You've seen it in previous videos. It's been in backdrops and used as props and displays in many videos. I've had this board from ASRock since before 2nd Gen Threadripper launched. If I stick that chip in this board, it probably will not boot. Now, I could certainly stick this chip in there, although I wouldn't want to stick this in because I want to keep it sealed so I can sell it as new. I could take the 1950X out of my other Threadripper build and stick it in, and I would have to if I was using the Gaming 6. But with BIOS flashback support, I should be able to update the BIOS of this board without a working CPU, and frankly, for $400, that feature should be there. Talking over opening start. Now this box opens similar to the premium box. In fact, it's the same shape and size as the high-end Skylake-X box, which I think is kind of interesting. It opens from the top like this and then slides out with a nice interior box. Next up, we have to open the box, and it opens just like the premium box did on the, it's a nice design. I know it's just a box, but it's nice. Thank you, ASRock. The Extreme 4 didn't have this silk screened, and I think that's cheap and unnecessary. This is silk screened. That looks nice. I'd be proud to put that into my machine. We have 4 SATA data cables. We have a high bandwidth bridge if you're putting in 10 series cards. Maybe you have 2 1080 Ti's. That would certainly work. We have what looks like a place for, I'm going to guess future Wi-Fi. I doubt it. Well, maybe. We have a M.2 screw. We have 1, 2, 4 M.2 screws. And then we have our quick start guide. I won't make the coaster joke again. You have the driver's CD there. You have the software setup guide, which probably isn't. Go download the software from ASRock's website when you set these up. And then we have the quick installation guide, of which this part is English, and it's the quick install guide. It explains the pinouts and ports and everything else. Oh, there it is. Phantom Gaming. There is our postcard. Enough of that. This is, by the way, the same actual box and shape as the other one, for those who'd be curious. There we go. Put that down there. Let me take it out of the foam. We will clip each of these so we can have a nicer, closer look at the board. With the board out of the foam, let's take a closer look. This time, I'm going to start up here at the top. Phantom Gaming X399. These are not gray like the other 2 boards were. This is black. You can see we have 2 8-pin CPU power connectors, but of course we do. There are 2 fan headers up here with an RGB header next to it. This only has 5 fan headers like the other 2 boards. ASRock, you need more fan headers on your boards, seriously. So you've only got the 2 up here, and then there is a fan header here, and then 2 more down on the bottom, 1 here and 1 here. We have our 24-pin ATX connector. There is only a single USB 3 front panel connector here on the side, but there is 1 more down here on the bottom. There is no USB 3.1 front panel port, which for the $250 retail price of this board surprises me a little bit. For $250, it should have that. You've got your 8 SATA ports. You've got your two M.2 slots down here, and then one under this heat shield right here, and that is actually, that is metal. That is not plastic. Is that a good thing? I don't know. It is under your graphics card, but you can always install drives down here. Because this is a high-end desktop platform, you do not have to install your M.2 slots, your M.2 drives here if you don't want to. In fact, I might put my primary drive down there. We do have a little bit of plastic peeling for you ASMR fans. And then you can see the huge TR4 socket right here. The CPUs actually come with the tool, with the wrench you use to undo these. There's an order. We have 1, 2, 3. So you open it, 3, 2, 1, and you close 1, 2, 3. This socket design, in my opinion, is excellent because it pops up, you take your chip and you slide it in vertically. You do not have to drop it in place. I'm sure these sockets are expensive to make. It's probably one of the reasons why the X399 boards all tend to cost a little bit more, but that is a great, great socket design. I really, really like it. We've got 3 X16 slots here, all metal guarded. Notice we have no 1X slot, and no one cared. I can't imagine anybody buying a board at this level for the chip you put in here is going to care about the lack of a slot, but it does not in fact have a 1X slot. Here is the M.2 Wi-Fi adapter up here. That's why there were 4 M.2 screws in here. 1, 2, 3, it's under here, and then 4, and that's what that other plate's for, so you can put the antenna if you install a Wi-Fi. So if you want to add Wi-Fi, that's actually very accessible and very easy. Just keep in mind, it's actually going to be installed under your first graphics card slot, and so whatever antenna and whatever else wires have to run, we'll have to run down here and plug in. You've got 2 USB ports, USB 2 ports on the bottom. You've got your BIOS reset switch right here, TPM, another RGB standard header right there, front panel audio right there, front header ports right there. It's all very standard. As to whether or not you like the looks of it or the layout, that's certainly a personal preference, but it's got everything that you would certainly require. Sound, just like the other boards, is nothing special. I don't know that ASRock is known for superior onboard sound, but it is what it is. If you care, you're buying a separate sound card anyway. This I like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 USB 3.0 ports plus a Type A and a Type C USB 3.1 Gen 2. So there are 10 USB 3 or 3.1 ports on the back. That is very nice to see. Combo PS2 mouse and keyboard port, audio ports, and 1 gigabit Ethernet and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. Now, of course, in order for that to run at 2.5, it has to be plugged into something that supports 2.5, and that's probably pretty rare, so it may or may not make a difference to you. But if you care, it's better than nothing. I don't know whether or not that makes a huge difference, but you know, it is what it is. I'll turn this over and let you see the back of the board just to give you an idea what it looks like. And it's actually a pretty simple layout on the back. There we go. There is the Phantom Gaming 6 200-ish after mail-in rebate motherboard, and let's go grab the other one and take a look at the top-end board. Finally, the last board that we're taking a look at, the Fatality ASRock Gaming X399 Professional. Holy smokes, this is huge. In fact, this actually opens up. I'll show you this before I open it up. It's Velcroed, and yeah, that is a sexy motherboard. Holy smokes. So let's get this thing opened up. I will be doing a build with this board. I will be putting that 2990WX CPU into this board, and it is definitely going to be interesting. Oh, this is interesting. This opens. There are 2 separate trays in here, one of which has the board. Interesting that that's not an anti-static wrap. And one of which has all the components. First things first, let's take a look at the component package and see what's included in here. I suspect this is going to be very similar to the other boards. We have a, oh, now this is interesting. This is a 3-way SLI bridge. And the spacing is different than was in the X299 board. That is definitely different spacing to, I like that. I have never tested three-way SLI. I have done two-way multiple times. I've done crossfire. I have never, I don't have three identical cards. I don't know, we might test that at some point. What the, that's weird. Four-way SLI. Now that's interesting. And it's interesting that it has two plugs here and then the four. I don't know how I would do that because I'm not going to go buy four identical cards. I've got, let me know in the comments below whether you want to see me try to put multiple cards together or whether you think that's the dumbest thing on earth. It's got four evenly spaced slots. If you're ever going to do it on a board, this is the one to do three or four-way testing. I personally think it's kind of silly, but who knows? I could be surprised. We've got ourselves some M.2 screws. We've got our Wi-Fi antenna. The Wi-Fi is built in. Just like the other board, nice silk screen, good job. What is this? 3 bridges? Seriously? ASRock. I guess this is part of what you're paying for. This is a, oh wow. That is to separate, notice the spacing? That lets you install 2 graphics cards 2 slots apart and split slots. This lets you install 3 cards next to each other, and that lets you do all 4. So if you do two-way SLI, they expect you to alternate slots, to skip the second slot down. That is interesting. And we have another M.2 screw. We've got, you know, with all the high bandwidth bridges they're providing, you'd think they'd include, you know, more than 4 SATA cables, but that's fine. Those are cheap. ASRock Wi-Fi connector utility, that's pretty standard. Software setup guide. What's interesting is when you open 4 of these boards back to back like this, you start to notice just how similar they really are. I thought long and hard about doing these separately. I thought about doing the Skylake-X separate from Threadripper, or the thing is, this is going to be a ridiculously long video. My hope is that people put it on, or they skip around, or they look for the boards they're interested in. If I did these as 4 separate videos, I have a feeling that people would decide it's clutter. We have a driver CD, we have a postcard, and then we have, it's exactly like the others. Nothing overly fancy here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and stick all this back in the box. That leads us to our motherboard, which is packed differently. Oh, okay, the foam does this just come out? This just come out. Oh, there we go. And then there is some down here. We'll take that off very carefully, because once it kind of gets stuck on there, it's actually hard to take off. And then there's some right here. And then some right here. And then some right here. What's interesting about all of this board has never been out of the box. The plastic has never been off of it. It's the zip ties are tied down. It's weird that it is not in an anti-static bag. It's just in the box. I don't recall them ever. I might be the first one that's done like that. So we'll take each of these, clipping these off. Excellent packing job, ASRock. Really, this is ASUS, MSI, and Gigabyte. Are you watching this? Probably not. If by chance any of you are watching this, this is how you pack boards. I want this to become the standard for board packing in the industry. With the board out of the box, I've now had a minute to look it over. This is definitely not shall we say, manufactured on the same run as the previous boards. You can tell a number of differences. We're going to start at the top of this board. By the way, yes, this only has 5 fan connectors. ASRock, stop that immediately. We have an 8-pin CPU power connector up here, and we have a 4-pin CPU power connector right here. Now, in truth, with the kind of power supply this is going to have, 4-pin, 8-pin probably doesn't matter because the wires are still going to transmit the power. You'll tie back the other half of the 8-pin connector to make it a 4-pin. It's going to get plenty of power. That seems odd for what this board costs. Why does it not have 2 8-pin power connectors? Considering the power delivery, considering this is rated for the that blows my mind. I don't understand that at all. Furthermore, the heatsink is not impressive. I would go so far as to say I think the Phantom Gaming 6 has a better heatsink up here. This concerns me in terms of temperatures for the voltage and the power delivery. 2990WX might be fine. Overclocking it might not. Not that you're going to overclock production anyway. You shouldn't be overclocking such a chip, but it feels like a previous generation board, which it is actually. I mean, this was built for the first gen stuff, and the Phantom Gaming 6 was built for second gen. But that's not happy about that. We have a 24-pin ATX connector. We have the excellent TR4 socket. We have 8 memory slots, 2 more fan headers down here. We have our evenly spaced X16 slots. I'll tell you what, if they did anything right with this board, ASRock did this right. The way they're spaced, the way the headers are. No, I don't think you're all going to be doing 3-way and 4-way SLI on this, but the ability to easily install cards evenly spaced is very nice. There's a completely pointless 1X slot right here in the middle that nobody will use, but it's there. Let some advertisers if you... Okay, there's probably one person who needs that, but no. You've got your... Oh, now this is interesting. There's an RGB header here behind the USB 3 port. There's no RGB header at the top, which I don't... If you're going to do RGB, that's not where I would put it, but I'm not going to be doing RGB with this, so I don't care, but that's a weird spot. This is a U2 port, which just indicates to you the generation of this board. This is not on the current boards. Nobody's doing U2. Intel did some U2 drives. Basically, that lets a 2.5-inch solid-state drive be an NVMe drive. That's essentially allows a PCI Express, 4 PCI Express lanes to go out, but it never caught on. Nobody's doing it. Everybody went to M.2, so that demonstrates the era of this board. We've got 8 SATA ports, and then very interestingly, you don't see this very often. This is a PCI Express 6-pin power connector for 75 watts of power with a decent power supply, 150 watts, frankly, because the extra 2 pins are just ground pins, or one of them is anyway. So this provides additional power for the board on the bottom of the board other than these. I actually don't mind the location. I've seen some of these 6-pin connectors in the middle of the board, and I'm like, why would you put it there? That's a horrible location for... Yes, I know it's close to the CPU and stuff. Horrible. Down here is fine. Over here is fine. It's an extra thing you'll have to connect. In fact, it may be optional. I'll have to look at the manual, but that basically makes up for the power up here and spreads the power across the board, especially for plugging in a lot of devices to make sure that plenty of power gets to the slots. We have our debug code right here, which is nice. We have our second USB front panel connector here. We've got power and reset switch, USB 2. There's a COM port here, which there are people who legitimately straight up still need a COM port. So there is a COM port, HD audio, RGB, and so on. Now, here's what's interesting. This is the only board we've looked at today that has plastic over the audio solution. It's plastic. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean it's shielded. That doesn't mean it's better. It means it's got decorative plastic. It does have the Sound Blaster Cinema 3, which means nothing. I mean, it's just a software solution. Again, if you care about your sound, you're going with dedicated sound. You're not using onboard sound. It's good enough for a lot of people. Many, many people are going to go, my onboard sounds fine. And it probably is. But if you're doing content creation, you should have dedicated sound. I was blown away when I went to dedicated sound. So as far as these fins go, I'm not impressed. And this solid block up here is not doing anything. I mean, the cooling is disappointing. Here is the side or the back panel. Now we have our antenna here for our built-in AC Wi-Fi. We have our BIOS flashback switch, which we're definitely going to need because this probably has the launch BIOS on it. We have 10 USB ports, and these are lighter colored. These might, I'll have to look it up, these might be USB 3.1 ports. We may have 4 of those. I did not put that in my notes. 10 gigabit networking, and then 2 Intel 1 gigs. These can be teamed on the latest version of Windows. You've got combo port, and you've got your audio is way up here. That is an interesting. Notice the audio is not at the bottom like it usually is. That's very strange. When is the last time you saw the audio halfway up the I/O shield? That is very odd. And I'll just turn it over this way because I want you to see, here's the U2 port, which you won't use. And here is the 6-pin PCI Express power connector, which you probably will. And then turning it on its back. Actually, there's some very nice power thingies back here. Let's get the other board and put them side by side. Here we are with the boards side by side on the desk, and now you can see them. Notice how much larger the piece of metal is on the newer but less expensive board. Does that large piece of metal actually do anything and make a difference? I don't know. I really would need to put both of them on a test bench and play around with them. And some of you may be saying, well, why don't you do that? I'm not convinced that I have enough people watching my videos buying these to justify the time and energy. I really should put that time and energy into putting consumer boards on test benches. But that's one of my biggest concerns. Notice the power delivery difference here. You've got USB 3 ports, the front panels are on the same spot. This has a U2 on the higher end board. We don't over here. We've got 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2. What's interesting is this board, the Fatality, does not have a heatsink over the top M.2 slot there, but we do have the 4 X16 slots, whereas we'll only have 3 over here. You can see the plastic on top of the sound. If you take a look at the location of these, I mean, it looks like it's identical in terms of what the sound really is. All this is a piece of plastic. This looks and feels like a generation back in terms of development. I said somewhere earlier in this video that I was going to be building the 2990WX on this premium board. I am actually, as I record this video, this wasn't something I thought of before, but as I sit here and record this, I am rethinking that. Only because the lack of 2 8-pin connectors up here has me concerned that it wasn't designed for 250 watt chips, even if it will support them and will work with them, and the smaller heatsink, and some of the other features like the U2 port, meaning it's an older revision board. This physical board is over a year old. It was made back in, I actually believe this board was physically made in 2017. So this board's probably about a year and 4 months old, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But there are refreshed X399 boards that came out when Threadripper 2 came out. And I'm going to do some more investigating because here's the thing. This is roughly a $360, $370 board on Newegg right now. It retails for I think it retailed for $420 or $430 at one point, but it's currently under $400. But if you're installing a $1,700 CPU like I am, the question becomes, do I want to use this year-ish old board, or do I want to get something that's been made more recently post Threadripper 2? If I was installing a 2950X, I don't think it would matter. It's a 150 watt chip, and it certainly was designed for it. And it's a premium setup, and it's premium power delivery. I think a 2950X, no big deal. But a $1,700 2990WX, I'm going to do some investigating, and I might leave a pinned comment down in the comment section below, or leave a note in the video description once I decide what I'm going to do. But as far as features go, these two are remarkably similar, except where they're not. Let me know what you think in the comments below between a newer version, newer refresh board versus an older design but with a better power delivery system. Oh, I know what I wanted to show you. Let's turn these over, because if you look at the back of the board, you will notice a fairly big difference back here. As we turn these over, take a look at where the voltage regulators and the power delivery is. Notice all these extra chips right here? Notice the lack of chips back here. Now this could simply mean that these chips are on the other side of the board here. I'd have to take the heatsink off and unscrew it, which I'm not going to do, to see whether or not they are actually under there. I mean, there is power delivery under there, but there's power delivery under there on every board. Identifying those individual chips is not my specialty. This is starting to get outside of my wheelhouse. But just looking at the back of them, the boards themselves look like they're basically the same basic board with some modifications for designs. They're probably made in the same factory. They're the same cutout, the same layout. You can see the ports here. You can see the M.2 slots. It's all actually very, very similar. The spots for the PCI Express slots are a little bit different, but this is definitely different. Let me know what you think down in the description below. Let me know what your favorite X299 or X399 board is. Well, this has been a long and detailed video, and hopefully you're all still here watching it. I certainly appreciate it. Links in the video description below to Amazon and Newegg for all the stuff I showed here, along with the CPUs and along with the full selection of boards, X299 and X399. Those are affiliate links. They do support the channel. I do get sent samples, but I do have to buy stuff as well. I don't get sent everything, and so your support helps me bring long, detailed videos like this to you, which I hope at least help send you in the right direction and give you more information on making your choice. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Hit the bell notification icon next to that to be notified when new videos are coming out. Hit the join button next to the bell notification icon to join the Deal Nation. For only a couple of dollars per month, you get a loyalty badge next to your name in the comments below and on YouTube live streams. You get custom Tech Deals emojis to use in the comment section and on live streams. And you provide direct support to this channel, helping me to do stuff like this. You can also join on Floatplane or Patreon. Those are linked down in the description below as well. Twitter, Twitch, and Discord links are down in there as well. Thank you all so very much for watching. I will see all of you next time.